I'd been hiking the Blue Ridge section of the Appalachian Trail for years, yet this late autumn evening felt different from the moment I pulled into the gravel lot. The sun was sinking behind the ridgeline, painting the sky with a thin copper wash. A cold wind carried the bite of coming frost, and every sound, the creak of trees, the rattle of dry leaves, seemed unnaturally sharp. I sat for a minute with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. It was supposed to be a quick out and back, 2 miles to my favorite overlook and back before dark. I'd done it dozens of times, but as I zipped my jacket and shouldered my pack, I hesitated. Something about the evening air felt watchful. The trail began in open hardwoods where oak leaves carpeted the ground in shades of rust and brown. My boots made a steady crunch, the only sound besides the faint whine of wind. Normally, even this late in the season, there'd be the occasional bird call or the distant chatter of squirrels. Tonight there was nothing. No insects, no rustle of life. Just the echo of my own footfalls. About half a mile and I noticed how the quiet pressed against my ears, like cotton stuffed into them. I told myself it was the cold, animals hunkered down, night coming early. Still, I found myself whispering when I checked the time, 4:48 p.m. The path narrowed as laurel thickets leaned close from both sides, branches arching overhead to form a tunnel. I just settled into a brisk pace when another sound slipped in under mine, footsteps. Soft, deliberate, perfectly matched to my stride. I stopped. The echo stopped. Only the hush of the woods remained. Probably a deer, I murmured, though the words felt hollow. Deer don't move in perfect rhythm with a human walker. I started again a little faster. The extra footsteps started too, steady, unhurried, never gaining or falling behind. I spun around. The fading light revealed only a corridor of trees and the long, empty trail. I cupped my hands and called, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice came back thin and flat. No answer. The air smelled of damp earth and iron, like a cold stream. I tightened the straps of my pack and pushed forward, heart ticking a little faster. Every sense sharpened, the scrape of my boot on rock, the faint creak of a branch overhead. And always, that second set of steps behind me. Another quarter mile and the trail dipped toward a ravine where shadows pooled like ink. Here the canopy thickened until the last light barely reached the ground. I flicked on my headlamp. Its narrow beam quivered across twisted trunks. That's when a sharp crack of wood split the silence, loud, close, like a heavy branch snapping under weight. I whipped around, light slicing the dark. Nothing moved. I told myself to breathe. Probably a falling limb, I reasoned, though the night air was dead calm. My phone showed a single bar of service. I thumbed a quick text to a friend. On Blue Ridge Trail. Weird noises. If you don't hear from me in an hour, call. I doubted it would send, but the small glow of the screen steadied me. I picked up the pace. So did the unseen follower. The cadence was unmistakably human now, heel, toe, soft but deliberate. Adrenaline began to tingle in my arms. When the trail curved toward the overlook, twilight drained the last color from the sky. I broke into a jog, breath pluming white in the cold. Leaves hissed beneath my feet. Behind me, the phantom steps quickened, dry leaves scattering like whispers. Then silence. I risked a glance over my shoulder. A pale shape flickered between the trunks. Too tall for a deer. Too still for a person. I froze, heart hammering so hard it blurred my vision. The shape swayed once as if leaning forward, then melted into the black. I didn't wait. I ran the final half mile, every muscle firing, breath burning like smoke in my chest. Branches clawed at my jacket, stones rolled underfoot. The trailhead lights finally winked through the trees like distant stars. I burst into the parking lot, gulping the sharp night air. My car sat alone under the half moon. The ordinary world seemed to snap back around me, wind stirring leaves, a lone crow calling from the ridge. Before leaving, I turned and swept my phone's flashlight across the trail entrance. Fresh prints marked the mud beside my own. Not boot treads. Bare feet. Each print wider than a man's hand, toes splayed as though pressed by something heavy. A chill shuddered through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled away, headlights flashing through the woods, I caught a flicker of pale movement in my rearview mirror, gone before I could focus. The text I'd sent finally delivered an hour later when I reached the highway. At home I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me sit upright. By morning, curiosity and unease knotted together. I posted my story on Reddit, half hoping someone would laugh and tell me it was just an animal. Instead, replies poured in. A woman from North Carolina wrote that she'd been shadowed by invisible footsteps on a nearby stretch of trail the week before. A man from Virginia described hearing someone pace outside his tent all night though no one was there at dawn. Others mentioned a local legend, the Watcher of the Blue Ridge, a presence that follows travelers at dusk and vanishes when confronted. Their words were both comfort and curse. I wasn't alone in what I'd heard, but that meant something real, something unknown, was out there. 3 days later I returned in daylight with a friend. We found nothing but the normal smells of pine and earth, the chatter of chickadees. Yet when we reached the spot where I'd seen the pale figure, the forest fell silent again. The air thickened as if holding its breath. I haven't hiked that trail at dusk since. The mountains are beautiful in the day, but when evening slides down those ridges, it feels as though the woods wake up and listen. And sometimes when the wind dies, I swear I can hear those footsteps still, matching mine step for step just out of sight. I grew up in Blair County, Pennsylvania, a stretch of farmland and wooded ridges where the Appalachians begin to roll east. By February the snow usually packs hard across the fields, but last winter a late storm glazed everything in fresh powder. I'd been out of town for work and returned home just after dawn to check on the small cabin my grandfather left me, a place tucked against the lower slopes near Hollidaysburg. The dirt road was empty as I parked by the old split-rail fence. A soft wind cut through the hemlocks, carrying that frozen metal smell only deep winter has. I should have heard chickadees, maybe the distant bark of a dog. Instead, there was only the hiss of snow crystals skittering across the ice. I followed the narrow path to the cabin with my boots crunching in the crust. Halfway up the slope I stopped. Across the blank sheet of snow, a single trail of enormous tracks stitched a line from the woods straight to my porch. At first glance I thought, bear. The prints were huge, nearly the length of my forearm, but the stride was wrong. Each step perfectly placed, heel to toe, as if whatever made them walked upright. And they weren't the round, splayed marks of black bear leaves. These were long, almost human, yet wider than any boot. I crouched to look closer. No claw marks. The snow around the edges had melted in a faint ring, as though something warm had pressed into it moments before. The morning was still below freezing. I felt the hair rise along my neck. The tracks came from the tree line about 50 yards away. I followed them backward first, moving slow, every sound swallowed by the soft air. The trail led straight into the woods, then vanished where the pines thickened and the ground turned to shadow. No broken branches, no sign of struggle, just the abrupt end of that single-file march. I turned back toward the cabin. Each print ahead of me sank a solid 3 inches deeper than my own boots. At the porch steps I paused. The final impression rested on the bottom stair, toes pointing toward the door. Whatever it was had stood there, facing the cabin, long enough to pack the snow tight. My stomach knotted as I realized my own footprints were the only ones leading away. Inside, the cabin felt colder than the air outside. I checked every window and latch, still locked from the inside, no sign of entry. But the scent of pine sap and cold iron clung to the walls. I brewed coffee on the propane stove, hands shaking as I lit the match. For nearly an hour I sat at the table, staring through the frosted window at those impossible tracks. By mid-morning my neighbor Carl stopped by on his snowmobile to see if I'd made it home. He killed the engine and squinted at the trail. "Bear?" he asked. "Strides too long," I said. Carl stepped beside one of the prints and whistled. His boot looked child-sized next to it. "I've hunted these woods 30 years, he said quietly. "Never seen anything like that." We followed the line again into the trees, hoping sunlight might reveal more. But just like before, the trail ended in shadow. No broken twigs, no drag marks, nothing. That evening the temperature dropped to single digits. I slept fitfully by the wood stove, the memory of those prints burning in my mind. Every creak of the old timbers sounded like slow footsteps on snow. The next morning I returned to town for supplies and told a few locals at the diner. One older man nodded knowingly and said, "You found the holidays bug tracks." He claimed hunters had whispered about them for decades, prints that appear after heavy snow, always in a single file, always stopping at a tree line as if the creature simply vanishes. Later that week I posted the photos on Reddit's r/14 research, expecting jokes or wild guesses. Instead, hikers and hunters from across the Appalachian corridor chimed in with near-identical stories. Massive, human-like prints with no visible origin, appearing overnight and gone by the next thaw. Some called it a regional Bigfoot. Others spoke of an old mountain spirit that walks only when the world is silent, leaving behind nothing but a line of impossible steps. I don't know what I believe. The snow melted after a few days, taking the evidence with it. But every time a winter storm rolls over the Allegheny front, I think of those prints marching from the dark woods to my door, and the fact that, for a while, something stood there in the quiet, watching. I grew up in a small valley town at the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of place where the ridges cut the sky like dark teeth and everyone knows who you are by the sound of your truck. Our town had one stoplight, 2 diners, and a history built on coal. My father worked in the railroad yard until it shut down. My grandfather had been a miner long before that, the kind of man who carried black dust in the lines of his hands no matter how hard he scrubbed. From the time I was a kid, the mountains felt alive to me, ancient and patient, full of stories older than the church bells. Behind our house ran a narrow trail that snaked through laurel and pine before climbing toward a long-abandoned coal shaft. The mine's mouth was just a sagging wooden frame half swallowed by vines, but when the light hit it a certain way, it looked like the earth itself was opening to breathe. Locals said the shaft collapsed in the 1930s, trapping 3 men inside. Their bodies were never recovered. Some folks swore you could hear their hammers if you stood quiet on a still night. Kids dared each other to toss rocks inside and run, but most adults avoided it altogether. They said some doors stay closed for a reason. I never paid those warnings much mind. By 17 I knew the trail as well as my own backyard. I hiked it after school to clear my head, especially in the fall when the hills glowed with copper and blood-red leaves. I liked the solitude, the way the woods swallowed the noise of town until all I heard was my own breathing. One late October afternoon, a storm front rolled in from the west, bruising the sky purple. The air smelled of wet iron and would smoke from distant chimneys. I checked the horizon, figured I had at least an hour before the rain. It would be a quick out and back, I told myself, a last walk before winter truly settled in. The trail felt different as soon as I stepped beneath the canopy. Usually the woods sang with sparrows and the occasional squirrel. That day nothing. No birds. No wind. Even the crunch of leaves under my boots seemed swallowed, like sound itself had thinned. It was a silence so deep it made me lower my voice when I muttered to myself. Halfway to the shaft, the first sound reached me, a faint tapping, rhythmic, like someone striking 2 stones together far underground. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. It came again, perfectly spaced. Not woodpecker fast, not random. Deliberate. I called out, "Anyone out here?" My words felt small, slipping between the trees. The echo came back slow, as if it had traveled through a tunnel and forgotten its shape. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was water dripping in the old mine. Still, curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, pulled me forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air cooler, carrying a faint whiff of sulfur and something like burnt matches. By the time I reached the clearing, dusk had blurred the edges of the world. The mine's mouth yawned black and wide. That's when a figure stepped forward. At first I thought it was shadow. The outline was human but wrong, taller, limbs too long, shoulders too narrow. It tilted its head, listening. Then came 3 slow knocks against the timbers. Knock, knock, knock. My breath caught. I stumbled back but my feet wouldn't turn. The figure raised one hand, pale, almost luminous in the dim light, and pressed a finger to where its lips should have been. The spell snapped. I ran. Branches clawed my jacket, brambles tore my jeans, but I barely felt them. Behind me came the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, soft but steady, matching mine exactly. Not hurried, not chasing, just there. By the time I broke through the last line of trees into our backyard, rain was falling in cold, heavy sheets. I slammed the porch door and locked it, heart hammering so loud it drowned the storm. From the kitchen window I stared at the dark path. Nothing moved. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the old house sounded like those knocks. When the wind rattled the shutters, I jerked awake, certain someone stood outside. Around midnight the smell of sulfur drifted faintly through my room. I told myself it was the furnace kicking on, but my stomach knew better. Morning brought a brittle blue sky. I should have stayed inside, but stubbornness won again. I grabbed a flashlight and went back. The trail was slick from rain, all footprints washed away, except at the mine entrance. There, on the damp earth, lay 3 perfect circles of ash, each the size of a dinner plate, arranged in a triangle. No sign of a campfire, no fallen branches, just gray powder in a pattern too neat to be chance. I told my father. He listened without interruption, face unreadable. When I finished, he just nodded and said, "Some doors stay closed for a reason." Then he added something I'd never heard. When he was a boy hunting with his own father, he'd heard the same 3 knocks echo from the shaft. They never spoke of it again. I tried to forget. I really did. But the memory stayed like a splinter under skin. Weeks later, I posted my story on a hiking forum, half hoping someone would laugh it off. Instead, replies poured in from people up and down the Appalachian range. Different states, different years, same experience. Sudden silence, the smell of sulfur, rhythmic tapping, a figure in the shadows. One man from Kentucky described circles of ash after a storm. A woman from West Virginia wrote about a tall shape pressing a finger to its lips. Even now, years later, I hike those mountains often, but I give that shaft a wide berth. Sometimes, when the air turns heavy and the birds go still, I feel that familiar chill along my spine. I tell myself it's just the weather. Yet I can't shake the sense that something waits in those hills, patient, listening, and ready to knock when the world grows quiet. I spent 2 summers as a fire tower lookout deep in the Appalachian backcountry, miles from the nearest paved road. The job sounded romantic when I signed up. Watch the tree line for smoke, keep a daily log, enjoy solitude. By the second week I'd learned the mountains keep their own kind of company. My tower stood on a bald ridge above endless green waves of forest. The only way in was a narrow gravel road that twisted like a snake for nearly an hour from the highway. No cell service, no neighbors. Just the creak of the tower in the wind and the occasional distant call of a hawk. One evening in mid-September, a heavy fog rolled in early, thick as milk and laced with the smell of wet stone. I was finishing my weather notes when the radio on the desk crackled. A single burst of static, then a voice I didn't recognize. It was faint, childlike, almost a whisper. "Is anyone there?" I grabbed the mic and answered, thinking maybe a hiker had picked up an emergency channel. No reply. Only another burst of static that almost sounded like breathing. I went out onto the catwalk, scanning the forest with binoculars. The fog was so dense it swallowed my flashlight beam after 10 feet. Somewhere below, a branch snapped. "Hello?" I called, my voice carrying into the gray. Nothing. I told myself it was just an animal. Still, I locked the tower door and double-checked the bolt. Near midnight, I woke to a rhythmic thud against the metal supports of the tower. Not random, measured like someone climbing the ladder very slowly. Step. Pause. Step. I crept to the window. The fog had thinned just enough to see the outline of the ladder. A figure clung there halfway up, motionless. It wasn't a hiker. Too tall, limbs too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its skin, or what looked like skin, gleamed faintly, almost phosphorescent. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. The figure lifted its face toward me. 2 pale eyes reflected the tower light like an animal's, but there was no mouth. No nose. Just smooth gray skin. I stumbled back and grabbed the heavy flashlight. By the time I turned back, the ladder was empty. I stayed awake till dawn, every muscle locked, the radio silent. When daylight finally burned the fog away, I climbed down, half expecting to find footprints. Nothing. No impressions in the damp soil, no sign anyone, or anything, had been there. Only the metal rungs of the ladder, cold and slick with dew. I reported the incident to the ranger station. They logged it as possible trespasser, but the ranger's voice carried a knowing edge. Before hanging up he said, "You're not the first to see something out there. Keep your door locked. And don't answer if the radio calls again." I finished my contract but never worked another season. Even now, years later, when heavy fog drapes the hills near my home, I catch myself glancing toward the ridgeline, waiting for that slow, deliberate climb. If you've ever hiked these mountains or worked a lonely outpost, you know how easily the Appalachians blur the line between natural and supernatural. Have you heard the whispers, seen the lights, or felt that chill of being watched? Share your own experience in the comments. And if you want more true Appalachian horror, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next nightmarish story.